Greetings, lovers of lore. Welcome to the very first installment of the Whimsical Whispers podcast. I'm your host for today, Original Orchid, and today we're going to be discussing a very controversial series, The Selection, written by the wonderful and only Caste. This will be a collection of multiple episodes regarding The Selection and its time to come, but for this episode we'll be focusing on where it all began, the very first book, The Selection. Now, let's issue some warnings. There are going to be a lot of spoilers, so if you haven't read the books, which you definitely should, you are taking a huge risk. You should also note that none of this information belongs to us, but the wonderful Caste who made this book. The only information that belongs to us are, of course, our personal opinions, which leads us to our final warning. These are our own personal opinions, not facts, and everybody is entitled to have their own opinions. If you do have any different ones or similar ones that you'd like to share, then feel free to message us and engage in a wonderful, wonderful conversation on these wonderful stories. Now, let's get into the novel, where it takes place, and more. The novel, The Selection, takes place in a dystopian future called Illia, formed by a man named Gregory Illia after New Asia's invasion of the United States of America following either World War III or World War IV. Now, this man takes this opportunity to unite this area in order to call it the Kingdom of Illia and pronounce himself as royalty. However, in order to do that, he needs to have royal ties. So he marries his eldest daughter, later be known as the Crown Princess when it becomes the Kingdom of Illia, to a foreign prince, allowing him to state that he has royal ties, and thus supporting him when he declares himself the King of Illia, the very first king. Generations later, when this novel takes place, his descendant, Prince Maxon, would have his own very special celebration for his 19th birthday called The Selection, where he would choose the future queen and his future bride to be from the selection out of about 35 women. Now this is where we bring in America. America is the classic poor girl from the poor family due to unfortunate circumstances in these types of books. Now these unfortunate circumstances which we speak of are the caste system, which will be elaborated on in a later episode, but for now, all you need to know to understand this book review is that there are 8 castes, 1 being the highest and 8 being the absolute lowest. America's family, being 5s, are towards the bottom of the caste system. 5s are generally classically trained musicians, singers, artists, dancers, etc. Now, because of her low caste, she receives a lot lesser privileges than the higher ranks, such as things that shouldn't even be considered privileges, but a basic right, such as decreased opportunities to education, thus decreasing opportunities for later life, since school provides a lot of opportunities for young children, lesser opportunities to necessities such as food, proper clothing, and more. Because of this, America's mother decides to make a deal with her later into the novel. If she enters the selection, of which her family got a notice for in the mail that day, she'll be allowed to keep the money she makes from the side job she works to help the family, regardless of whether she's selected or not to be one of those 35 girls, and regardless of whether she wins if she is selected to be one of those 35 girls. Now this is a huge deal, because this would mean America could save up money for herself, allowing her future to be a lot more prospectful than it currently is. However, and yes, there's a however, you clearly expected it, of course, because this is a dystopian novel. America has a secret boyfriend. Secret from her family, secret from everybody, named Aspen Lager, the eldest child of the neighboring family, who she doubts would be elated for his girlfriend to be one of the 35 girls picked to vie over the Prince of Aaliyah, Prince Maxon, in the selection. After all, who would? And of course, regardless of Aspen, why would America, who has no interest in becoming the future queen, want to be one of those 35 girls, vying for Prince Maxon's love, a stranger she's never met before? Not exactly every girl's dream. But of course, as you probably already pieced together, since the series is called The Selection, and on the front of the first book, The Selection, there's a face of Prince of America, things didn't exactly go according to plan. That night, her boyfriend Aspen, aka the love of her life, crawled into her window, took her to their 5x5 treehouse, and after a lot of catching up, and the "oh, I missed you so much," "oh, I missed you more," and making out for a bit, they start talking about the selection, of which Aspen is aware about as well, since he has two younger sisters who are both recently became 16, and 16 is the youngest age for children to become eligible to enter this competition. She asks for Aspen's opinion on the entire thing, and he reveals while it's a bit cheesy to him, it does seem kind of amazing that some random person, regardless of their caste, could be selected to be the future queen, and that the public could be a part of this as well. He also expresses his sister's delight on how prospectful this competition could be to them. After speaking on the topics for a while, for some more time, he tells her to enter the selection, telling her that he should be providing for her, but he isn't, and he feels guilty about that. And she deserves so much better, and by being with him, she's not only setting herself up for a life she doesn't deserve, but there was also little to no chance things would get better. Now, what did he mean by that? Aspen was a class rank lower than her, America's family being 5s, and his family being 6s. 6s only being a bit better than 7s, and that they were better educated and also trained for indoor work. And by saying that things would not have a chance to get better, he was owing that to Aspen's father, their having passed away several years ago. And as Aspen stated, he wasn't the type to abandon his family while he was the primary caretaker. So balancing out his very little income and very little salvation as 6s, since America would later become a 6 if she were to marry him, since in this world, women take the caste of their husband, she'd be setting herself up for a life where there'd be little to no money with that little income, and it'd be stretched out between both them and Aspen's family. Despite her insisting that she doesn't care about this as long as she can be with the man she loves, he insists more and convinces her to take part in the selection, despite her beliefs that she'd never even have a chance to be selected, since there's going to be thousands of girls entering this competition. He tells her that she has nothing to lose. If she isn't selected, she'll still get her fair share of money, as she later finds out. And she'll know she at least tried for this competition. And if she is selected, she'd have the chance to become this huge queen and overall have a much better life. And even if she doesn't win this competition, girls who are selected to be one of those 35 girls are automatically moved up to either a 2 or a 3. So regardless of whether she won or not, if she was selected, she'd have a better life regardless. So she enters the competition. And surprisingly, well, at least for her, since unlike us readers, she doesn't know that she is the main character of a novel called The Selection, in which her face is on the front cover of. So of course, surprisingly for her, she's selected to be one of those 35 girls out of the thousands participating in this competition, to be one of those 35 girls for which will vie over Maxon and eventually have a chance to be his future bride. But unlike the happy thrill most girls would have received just from having a chance to become the future queen, America felt something very different: dread. For once she entered the competition, she'd never dreamed she'd be selected. She thought she'd just enter, get her share of money from her mother, and continue to live life the way she was living with her wonderful love for life, Aspen. But now, everything was different. She'd be forced to move to the castle. She'd be forced to vie over a guy she's never met. And she'd be away from her family and her loving boyfriend, of who she would probably need to break up with, since there'd be a chance she'd be the future bride of somebody else besides him. And here is where the story really begins. So, what did I like about this book? Number 1, I loved the dystopian world. Yes, I know, 2 words that should not be going together in the same sentence. I also understand that there are several books that I've read and that exist in the world that have this dystopian storyline, but I still thought it was worth mentioning, since every story tackles this a bit differently. And the caste system, unequal opportunities, and the fact that no character is perfect in this novel really set it different than many other dystopian novels. Since in most dystopian novels and worlds, at least that I've read, there's usually this one character who seems so amazing, this perfect role model that everybody aspires to be, and that person helps make this world from undystopian to dystopian. However, in this novel, America is not like that at all. In fact, she's quite the opposite. She's rude to several people while during this novel. In some cases, she's quite selfish, such as telling Maxon she doesn't like him, then later kissing him, then later being conflicted on her feelings. Not considering Aspen's struggles at times, and due to these reasons and more, many readers actually consider her to be annoying, and many don't even root for her in the first novel. Thus, this creates a character that's a lot more relatable, and moreover, a character that people can relate to, rather than one that people can aspire to. Though, of course, characters who people can aspire to are also important as well. It's just the difference in this novel with this character is just so incredible, because I don't generally see this in most novels. And also the fact that she actually had character. She wasn't just the scripted character who always did the right thing, always said the right things. She showed her flaws. She showed that sometimes she does have her best interest at heart, which of course isn't what we want always. But it is relatable, because not everybody puts everybody else first in every single second of their entire life. Not many people are going to be that selfless. And of course, just the fact that she seemed normal. Once again, and I know I've been saying this a lot, but she didn't seem perfect. And I very, very much like that. I also enjoyed Prince Maxon's kindness during this novel, from refusing to deliver harsh punishments to contestants who decide to leave during the rebel attacks on the palace, and more. And he was also the only character in this novel who was kind for its entirety. However, as I stated prior, it's not realistic at all to expect this, and in fact, relatability to characters, rather than the perfect character, is often more likable in these types of books. However, not everything in this book I enjoyed. I did dislike several rules in the selection, and of course the selection itself. But of course, that's a given, since the idea of the selection and its rules in this dystopian fantasy were made to hate for the sake of preserving its dystopianness. But there were some rules specifically that stood out to me that I'd like to talk about. Firstly, the contestant can only have a romantic relationship with the prince or princess. If the contestant does not like the prince or princess, it's considered treason and punishable by death. Think about that, guys. Well, it does make sense, Because if you're calling these 35 girls to be this guy's future bride, you probably should like him in order to become that future bride. But also the fact that it's very unlikely that 35 girls that have never met this guy before are going to like him. And maybe they'll like him as a friend. He's a very good guy. But as a romantic relationship, and from that standpoint, it's very, very unfair to believe that these 35 girls are going to all be in love with him. Especially because this isn't expected of the prince. Of which it should be expected, if it's going to be expected back, which it should not be either way. But still, the prince is choosing somebody who he'll be loyal to, presumably for the rest of his life. So if this rule is going to apply to one party, which again, it should not, it should probably also apply to the other party, which doesn't. I also disliked the rule where if the prince or princess invites the contestant to do something with him or her, it's advised that he or she shouldn't refuse, regardless of if it's dinner, outings, kissing, or even more than kissing. However, it should be noted that Prince Maxim doesn't implement this rule, but the fact that this rule still exists, how is this tolerable at all? Like, imagine if this random stranger you have never met before in your life tells you, hey, come over here for a second. Or even more than a second. Or just, hey, stay here. Are you supposed to oblige no matter what the request is? Even if it's completely unacceptable? And of course the fact that the person who tells these girls this rule says even more than kissing, and you can't say no? Where is the consent in this? Like, consent. Consent is a major thing that should be practiced. But of course, in this novel, and again, Prince Maxim doesn't oblige in this rule, but still, the fact that he's not needed to oblige to this consent is absolutely unacceptable on so many different levels. And of course, the final thing, I think what most ticked me off in this novel is that there's absolutely no timeline for the selection. It can last from days to years, and even longer. Can you imagine? If this guy hasn't picked, he can keep them there their entire lives, for as long as they live, because he has absolutely no timeline. So even if these people want to go home, they couldn't, because of the selection timeline that can literally last forever. Again, that's forever, and that's not something that can be taken lightly, because it's literally forever, for the rest of your life, for the rest of time. It doesn't even matter. And of course, the shortening one, which it could be even a few minutes or a few days, also seems a bit odd, because why would you pick up these girls' entire lives just for the sake of a few days? It's a little odd, or not a little, very odd. But of course, this is probably something that doesn't really happen, because who can pick their future bride in just a few minutes or a few days or a few hours? It's quite hard. So after careful consideration of this episode, would I consider this book to recommend to a friend or colleague or whatever? Yes, I would. However, I believe a certain age or a certain maturity of the mind is needed to fully grasp this dystopian universe to its full extent. And age, I believe, differs for most people. However, if you did like this book after you read it or are interested in this book, you may also want to check out this other dystopian novel, full series, the Shatter Me series, which is basically about this girl who cannot be touched, because if they do touch their skin, they'll burn. And it also talks about her being trapped in this room alone, and love interests, and just in general, this dystopian world where nothing makes sense, and this administration is controlling their entire universe, which may not sound as appealing from the way I'm saying it, but still, if you like this book, definitely check it out. Now, thank you for listening. Thank to this first installment. Thank you for supporting us. And leave your opinions down below. What do you think of this book? And what would you recommend to people who enjoyed this book? Thanks so much for supporting us. And once again, have a wonderful day. Thank you.